All right. Well, just to give you, anybody not here last week? Okay, Nick. Last week we saw how Nehemiah, and I don't want to say he lived poorly because he didn't live poorly. He lived very well, but he lived what?
On his own dime.
Yeah, he paid his own way, and all the tribute of food and other things that came in to him as would be due to any governor, he used that to bless the people. So he would feed people. He invited all different classes of people together to eat, and of course, he wanted to befriend people. Naturally, wanted to get information about his enemies and so forth. He was very, very shrewd diplomatically. He knew how to play the game, but he he paid his own way, and so I think that's kind of here where we left off right here. So this is, I believe, chapter 5, verse 16. Nehemiah's focus continued to be on the wall to oversee, direct, and encourage the workmen, and he did so again at his own expense. Nehemiah also made it a point not to use his position to enrich himself. He could have got land, could have got all kinds of bargains. That's one thing I learned in Bible college, and I think it was a good word of advice, and I never, ever, ever, ever do it. And that is, they say never use your position, like if you're a pastor, to get a discount. And, Nehemiah didn't do that either. He didn't say, well, I'm the governor, and I respect that. I really do. He never, he was not guided by the principles of opportunism, but rather by service. In verse 17, it was part of Nehemiah's social responsibility as a governor to entertain lavishly. Yet Nehemiah used food allotments to feed various classes of people that could supply him with information about the enemy. In the East, it was customary to calculate expense of a feast by the quantity of provision that was consumed and not by the dollar amount or whatever amount they were using back then. In verse 18, each day the meat alone would provide a meal for 600 to 800 people. That's how much food was coming in. And so his own food, he paid for his own food, and yet he fed other people, hungry people, the workers, right? One side note, chickens were domesticated in the Indus River Valley by 2000 BC. They were brought to Egypt by the time of Thutmose III in the 15th century BC. They were known in Mesopotamia and in Greece by the 8th century. The earliest inscriptional evidence of poultry in Canaan is the seal of Jazaniah, which was circa 600 BC, which depicts a fighting rooster. They were fighting roosters back then. In verse 19, Nehemiah included a sentence prayer in his memoirs for God to remember his good deeds favorably. There is a belief that Nehemiah's memoirs may have been inscribed as a memorial that was set up in the temple. So these words have survived. His prayers, a lot of the things that he wrote survived. This is a great example of how public prayers should be short, sweet, concise, and to the point. Nehemiah made 7 such prayers which begin with, "Remember me with favor, O my God." Interestingly, this prayer is almost identical to Nebuchadnezzar's prayer to his pagan deity Marduk. This just goes to prove that just because a person can pray doesn't mean that they're saved. A lot of people are very eloquent prayers. They got these golden tongues and they can just sit there and spellbound people, but that doesn't mean they're saved. Position of prayer. One can pray in any position, place or position, yet praying on one's knees keeps you humble and serious. You know, whatever you do in private, maybe other people don't know about it, but God knows about it. And so when you pray in private, that's really the best time to get on your knees. You know, it shows God that you are serious about prayer. It shows that you're being humble before Him. It's easy to be humble in front of everybody, right? You know, I could probably elaborate more on that, but that's okay. Purpose of prayer. Prayer is simply speaking to God, and God usually speaks back through His Word. Communication is vital to any relationship and may validate your salvation. So just because you can pray doesn't mean you're saved, but if a person doesn't pray, it probably means that you're not. You know, that's one thing with any relationship is communication, right? Practice of prayer. Pray while the dew is still on the leaves. Pray before bedtime. Pray before meals. And always be conscious of God's presence, right? You know, if we could discipline our minds to be conscious of God's presence within us at all times, you know, I think we could just about eliminate most of our sins, couldn't we? Because how can you be thinking of God and sin at the same time? You really can't, can you? Petition of prayer. Biblically, spiritual matters should be emphasized, yet generally we should always pray for all things. Family, friends, church, missionaries, business, civic, and ministry leaders, the sick, the afflicted, salvation for the lost, faith for the saved. For yourself, for your needs, for provision, right? I mean, I don't think there's not much of a limitation when it comes to prayer, right? And if you're ever worried about, am I praying in God's will? That's how you end your prayer, right? You just say, Lord, may your perfect will be done. And because you never want to pray against God, obviously, you know, kind of obvious. So, a word on leadership. Nehemiah revered God and prayed. He heard the complaints and realized that this was not a new problem. And if you weren't here the last week or two, a lot of the rich people had taken advantage of the poor people, had confiscated their lands, confiscated a lot of the stuff that they owned, because the poor people took loans out, and then the rich people charged them way, way more interest than they should have. And then, of course, even the people had to sell their children trying to pay themselves out of debt. And then, in turn, a lot of those children were then sold into the Gentiles. And so, again, he saw the problem. And that's why I don't think he waited too long to do something about it, because it was an ongoing problem. It wasn't just something new that popped up. He felt righteous indignation for what was going on. Nehemiah set an example of generosity and self-sacrifice, which made a profound impression on his oppressed countrymen. So they saw that he was not only helping them, but he was setting the example, because he gave loans out too. And a lot of his, head people, they were giving loans out, but they weren't charging interest, or, very little interest. They were trying. That's one thing I like about the care center, because they're not there to give you a hand out, they're there to give you a hand up. And they maintain accountability, And I always say to people that if you ever go to the care center, because you need help, and they ask you if you're ever interested in taking a financial class, always say yes. Because if you're willing to take their class and willing to, go through the steps, they're much more likely to help you more in the future, But a lot of people say, oh, no, I don't want to do that, or, I had one guy from the church I sent over there. He went through the class. I think they gave him, I don't know if they gave him like a $100 check or something like that. He and his wife went out and blew the $100 on pizza and beer. And then he said, oh yeah, that class was no good. That didn't help me one bit. And so again, they really try to help people. And a lot of people don't know how to manage their money. They really don't. Therefore, he never asked anyone to do something that he was not willing to do himself. Nehemiah held people accountable, he followed up, and he kept good records. So, that brings us to chapter 6. And as always, we've got a few questions to get us started. The first question is, as Christians, when your enemy offers you an olive branch, in other words, peace, aren't we supposed to accept it? Yeah, ulterior motives, faking it, I think deep in our heart we should want that peace, but yeah.
Well, in this case, he had ears out there too, and he knew that an olive branch from this guy was not going to be exactly what it was supposed to be. It wasn't. It was going to be bad.
Yeah. Is it an olive branch or is it a switch? Very good. Nehemiah's enemies supposedly were willing to meet with him in a neutral location and work out their differences. Why did Nehemiah decline, and was that the right decision? He knew their motives, yeah. Yeah, he knew their motives. They were up to no good. Well,
like you said a couple weeks ago, why would you ever go to a place called Oh No?
Yeah, I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on that. Yeah, because they wanted to lure him to a neutral place in the valley of Oh No. And if somebody wants to bring you to a place called Oh No, you know it's not good, right? What if Nehemiah had sent a representative or representatives in his place to meet with Sanballat to discuss the issues? He could have sent his right-hand man or his left-hand man to go there and meet with them and negotiate. They didn't want to negotiate. They just wanted him to come. Yeah, I think for the most part that's exactly correct. Yeah.
I think it would have showed some disrespect on their part or his part if he would send somebody else. So if there was any possibility of peace, it certainly would have been the right move to make.
Right. Yeah, you wouldn't want to send your friend to represent you and he gets killed. And then also, you mentioned disrespect. I think if he would have sent someone in his place, maybe it would disrespect them somehow. But then maybe on the other hand, it would legitimize their foolishness. You know what I'm saying? Because it's only would be if Nehemiah is believing them. Okay, I'll send my representative, But again, you don't want to legitimize someone who's doing evil. So I can see it going kind of both ways with the respect thing. In Nehemiah's time, as it is today, letters are sealed. So what would be the reason for keeping a letter unsealed? I hate licking the envelope because my mouth is always dry, and then I got to really work up that mouth, really get a good wad going there, and lick it, and it tastes terrible. And you ever cut your tongue on that thing? Oh man, yeah, because you do it really fast, because you hate doing it. Oh man, you get a paper cut, right? Well, I'm not as fancy as you are.
So basically, unsealed letters are basically public letters.
Uh-huh.
They're out to anybody that has prying eyes.
Yep. Yeah, if there's a letter there and it's open, people are going to look in there. They're going to see what's in there, right? And so, that's exactly what that is. And sometimes there are letters, that you send out purposely for the purpose of circulation. But then other times there's letters that you send out because you want to keep it private. And so, yeah. As a leader, is self-confidence important? Why or why not?
Very important to have self-confidence.
Everybody seems to agree with that. It is important. Okay? Can self-confidence cause us to underestimate our enemy? And if so, how do we balance the two? Yes.
I don't think self-conscious can cause it, but overconfidence
Ooh.
could be.
I kind of like that. I wish I would have thought of that. It's not self-confidence that's the problem. It's overconfidence. Very good. Very good. I'm going to get you guys teaching this class here pretty soon. Have you ever been beat up? And if so, did you fear for your life? You ever had anybody beat the tar out of you? Yeah. I knew a guy. Well, yeah.
I'm locked gold and gloves, so I got beat up a little, but never really beat up bad.
You were able to beat them up a little bit more
A
than.
bit more than they beat me.
That's cool. That's cool. I have to talk about that sometime. I love boxing. I love it. Yeah, I knew a guy, or we all knew a guy, Greg Ledford. And one time he called me and he said, Herb, I can't come to work. I said, why not? He said he got beat up. And it's not that I thought he was lying. I didn't think he was lying, but I said, okay. So anyway, after work, I drove to his house. And I walked in and I saw him sitting there and I could not believe it. I've not seen anything like this, not even on a TV horror movie. His whole head was this big, swollen. It was kind of swollen anyway, but now it was really swollen. One eye was down, one eye was up. I mean, the whole face was twisted. He had blood coming out of his ears and out of his. And it's a long story of how that happened, but basically, a friend of his stole somebody's car, and they thought he was involved. And so what they did is they grabbed him and jerked him out through his car window, and they threw him on the ground and began smashing his head into the cement over and over and over again. And he looked horrible. Anyway, yeah. And when you're in a situation like that, you're going to fear for your life. Yeah. What's worse than an enemy that you know? An enemy you don't know, yeah. I was figuring out how am I going to word that. I thought, let me word it really easy. Yeah, because a lot of times the person you think is your friend is really a double agent. He's feeding you information, but he's also taking your information and feeding it to the other guy. And I think that's even worse than a regular enemy. Because, it's obvious. It's a betrayal, So, okay, very good answers. So join us for the party. Nehemiah chapter 6, beginning in verse 1. When word came to Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies that I had rebuilt the wall, and not a gap was left in it, though up to that time I had not set the doors and the gates, Sanballat and Geshem sent me this message. Come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono. But they were scheming to harm me. So I sent messengers to them with this reply. I am carrying on a great project and cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you? 4 times they sent me the same message, and each time I gave them the same answer. That's 4 times that they sent that, right? So when the Samaritan leaders heard that all the gaps in the Jerusalem walls had been filled in, they concluded that a head-to-head confrontation would not be an advantage to them, would not be a wise move. They knew that being dug in behind the walls now gave the Jews a strategic advantage. And that's true in most military conflicts. Usually the ones that are dug in deep and have their positions set are usually have the advantage over the aggressor. So Sanballat and Geshem invited Nehemiah to meet with them in one of the villages on the plain of Ono under the pretext that in a friendly way they could discuss their differences and come to a mutual settlement as they served the king of Persia together. That sounds really honorable, doesn't it? Ono was about 7 miles southeast of Joppa, near Lod, and was probably proposed as a neutral location. Nehemiah recognized the invitation as a trap, and so he wisely declined. This was one of 4 such invitations. Consistently, Nehemiah answered that he was busy, he couldn't get away, he had important work to do, and so he declined. And, I think that was the right answer. Just number one, it was true. And, you don't need to give the enemy more information than they need. Even sometimes you have a friend, you sometimes don't have to give them more information than they need. Obviously, if they were to kill Nehemiah, everything would return back to the way it was before he had arrived. And so it would not really be to anybody's advantage. And again, never allow someone to lure you to a town called Ono. How about visiting Slaughter Beach? Yeah. Yeah, I've known some Slaughters, in my day. How about a town called Uncertain? Yeah, I got that coming up here. And there's a lot more towns that are, how shall I word this?
Truth or consequences.
Well, that's another one. I had that up there at one, and I think I took that one off. But there's a lot of towns that use very risque names. Yeah. So I decided not to put that one up there. How about Cut and Shoot? I should have put the state there, but whatever. How about Satan's Kingdom State Recreation Area? Hell, there's hell. Rough and Ready. Flippin' Church of God. Yeah, that is a town called Flippin'. And so everything there's called the Flippin' this and the Flippin' that. And how about Oddville? Yeah, just to name a few. The enemy's goal. It stands to reason that Nehemiah's enemies ideally didn't want to kill him because they might incur the wrath of King Artaxerxes, who had appointed him in the first place. That might backfire on him. Albeit their new plan was designed to drive a wedge between the king and Nehemiah. Remember, they were accusing him of ordaining prophets to proclaim him as the new king of Jerusalem, and that he was usurping the Persian government, usurping the king. And so if their plan worked, they would drive a wedge between him and the king anyway. So far, they've used various forms of scare tactic, which had been unsuccessful. Perhaps by now they realize that a restored Jerusalem could be to their advantage if Nehemiah could be corrupted and join them in their schemes of profiteering at the people's expense. So that might have been there might have been a little plan going on there, if they could lure Nehemiah out of his comfort zone, he might be more cooperative. And if not, they could always kidnap him and hold him for ransom. Or they could beat him within an inch of his life. Or as a last resort, they could still kill him and then try to blame it on somebody else. So they had really a lot of different things they could do to him. And I would never knowingly walk into that. Amen? Social occasions are only warfare concealed. You ever heard that expression before? You know, other than maybe children's birthday parties and what have you, when you look at social occasions, there's always something going on behind the scenes. Sometimes it is a family that's arguing and fighting. How many of you have ever had family members fighting and arguing at every get-together, right? Okay. Yeah, everyone. I'll give you an example. One year, I don't know if Shelley was with me or not, but I went to one of the Southern Baptist conventions. And, you know, in the main sanctuary, they had, you know, these great preachers coming out, you know, I mean, motivational, great preachers, you know, powerful, you know, really, they know how to get to you, you know, they know how to get to your heart, you know, I mean, really awesome guys. And between the preachers, they had these great music bands coming out with Christian music, and it's fantastic. I mean, it's fantastic. And then if you get, you know, a little bit too much of that, then there's, of course, the nice big show area with all the booths, you know, where you go to, it's like a trade show, you know, where you can buy books and there's different schools and this and that. I mean, you name it, resources for the churches, resources for the pastor. And I knew that somewhere the big shots have got to be, because this is also when they have their meetings, you know, their annual meetings, you know, they're going to have voting. That's why it's the convention, right? So I figured, well, it can't be here, can't be here, can't be here. It's got to be back there. So I walked back there, and, you know, and I can see lights on in the rooms. And as soon as I want to start looking in through the window to see who's in there, right away security. Can I help you, sir? Oh, no, I'm just walking, you know, just going for a walk, you know. Well, you'd walk right back that way. You know, because there's things going on behind the scenes. And that way when they have their meeting, you know, and they do stuff, they know exactly what they're going to say and how they're going to say it and how they're going to present things. And yeah. For example, here we have a little social occasion here where somebody's getting an award. Which is the one getting the award? I heard to the left and I heard to the right. You sure it's not the guy in the middle? That would be the safe bet. Yeah, like I would say the guy who's receiving the award is, the guy on the right. This guy here, he's holding up the award. Of course, they're shaking hands. They're smiling. Yeah, they got nice smiles. And see how this guy's hand is facing out? That is a position of dominance. So whenever you're in a crowd of people or there's a photo op, you want to make your hand is outward because that's showing dominance, okay? Now, sometimes good example would be Donald Trump, when he could not be in that position and the other guy had to be in that position, then he would take his other hand and lay it on both their hands, because that is another dominant position, okay? Yeah, and so in this case, you got here his hand facing out, and he's not just holding this up, is he? He's got it like laying right on that guy's arm there, right? So that's a position of dominance. When somebody shakes your hand, like I usually go straight in like that, but a lot of people will do it like this. And again, that's a position of dominance. People stand a certain way, people sit a certain way, whatever. Okay, so now what if you're offered an award? Oh, let me go back up for just a minute. Who's greater? Which one of those two guys is greater? The guy on the left. Why? Well, that means he's portraying himself as greater, but who's really greater?
I think the elderly man, needed that, the older man's probably, yeah, the greater because he's getting the award. Yeah, he gets the award because for a long time he didn't get one.
Yeah. Well, that sounds really like a good answer, but it's wrong. Think about it. The body that is giving the award is really greater than the one receiving the award. You see what I'm saying?
Because the guy that's giving the award has already been there, done that. It's a power thing.
He had already received the award, the young one there. Now the old one won, or? Looks like, why did Pastor give me an award?
Shelley, I'm going to give you the gold star tonight. Yeah, why would the cashier give you an award? Now, you might give her an award, okay, because you're the shift manager, whatever. You're in charge, and so you.
The position maybe, the greater is the word that's really holding me up. I don't think he's greater than that guy. Maybe he's in a higher position.
Right, I mean, he's not, this guy happens to be showing his dominance this way, but by being the one who's giving the award, he's placing himself in a higher position. Does that make sense? So now if you refuse the award, what does that mean? Yeah. I disagree with your organization, and I do not receive the award. You give it to somebody else. Yeah, what you're doing now is you're dissing the guy back. See? Okay, that's all called political strategy playing. Yeah, that's what it is. Posturing, right? They're posturing position. And when you're posturing, that is when you calculate risks and boundaries. Okay, so when I'm interacting with this guy, what are my risks and what are my boundaries? That's what you establish, okay, when you're posturing for position. You remember when Nehemiah said to Sanballat and Geshem and Tobias, he said, you know what, you guys have no part of Jerusalem. You guys have nothing to do with the city. You guys have nothing to do with the people. You guys have nothing to do with the religious system. I'm going to view you as an illegal alien. Remember he told them off and he kind of cut them off like that? Well, that's what he did. He said, I'm not going to recognize you anymore. Okay? Now, once all the posturing and calculating is done, all the risks and boundaries, now it's time to play the game. Okay? Logistics and strategizing. A lot of people, they go right into strategizing and they always fail because they're not considering first their logistics. You've got so many pieces and your pieces can only move certain ways. Okay? Just like if you're in a war, right, and you've got tanks. The tanks can only go so far a day. And then they've got to have fuel. So now you have to have tanker trucks escorting the tanks to keep them refueled. And then they can only go so far because they're going to run out of fuel themselves, And if you can deliver so many tanks on the battlefield, can the 10,000 soldiers that are coming also make it in time for the battle? Well, the tanks can only do so much, but then you're going to need a ground invasion, right? So how are you going to get the troops there? Do you have medical backup? Do you have food supplies? Do you have enough guns and ammo? Do you have everything that they need, right? Yeah, I said that, fuel, right. So again, you can't develop a strategy without first laying out your logistics and also understanding the logistics of the enemy. Because the more you understand your logistics and the logistics of the enemy, now you can begin strategizing a superior strategy, okay? And it's not always about chess, right? Chess is a very logical game. You can look from above, you can see what your opponent has, what you have. And you kind of have to guess, well, if I do this move and this move, he can do that move and that move. And then if I do this move and that move, he can do this move, And you got to be able to envision it in your head, okay? It's very much like mathematics, okay? Now, poker can be a lot like mathematics too. But what you can do with poker that you can't do in chess is bluff. You can bluff or you can call the bluff, right? So that's one advantage that poker has over chess.
Yeah, it depends how many cards you have.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can count, okay, the other cards, this guy has it or that one, you know which card you have, and when they're out, you go.
Yes, you are a card shark. Yes. No. But anyway, that's what Nehemiah is dealing with. He's dealing with the wall, the logistics of the wall. Remember, he had to get rid of the rubble because there was so much rubble he couldn't build the wall. Then they needed stones cut, new stones, and they needed this and this and this and this. And now he's dealing with the enemy at the same time. He's dealing with a lot of stuff. And so this is just some very basic concepts right here, okay? Charge of rebellion, verse 5. Then the 5th time Sanballat sent his aide to me with the same message, and in his hand was an unsealed letter, in which was written, "It is reported among the nations, and Geshem says it is true, that you and the Jews are plotting to revolt, and therefore you are building the wall. Moreover, according to these reports, you are about to become their king, and have even appointed prophets to make this proclamation about you in Jerusalem. There is a king in Judah. Now, this report will get back to the king, so come, let us confer together." I sent him this reply: "Nothing like what you are saying is happening. You are just making it up out of your head." They were all trying to frighten us, thinking their hands will get too weak for the work and it will not be completed. But I prayed, "Now strengthen my hands." And of course, we're not talking about the hand and cards, but we're talking, well, I'll get to that in a moment. But can you see how they have this unsealed letter, and now everybody is going to read this, and they're going to tell others about it, and you know how the rumor mill goes, right? Yeah, and even though it's a lie, people will believe that. And word's going to get back to the king eventually, right? It says, "It is reported among the nations," and then I like this, "and Geshem says it is true." See, he's leveraging another guy's name who's just another fiend, right? But he's leveraging another guy's name to give even more credibility to the letter. And so, this is a dirty, dirty, bad guy here, really is, okay? How you like how I did that?
So that's an example of calling someone bluff.
Well, I don't think there was anything else he could do if you think about it. He probably sent a letter back also unopened so that everybody could read that letter, And at least that's, I think, what I would have done. But again, he just basically says, "You're a liar." He doesn't get into detail, doesn't say a bunch of other stuff, but he calls him a liar. Whoa. During this period, letters were normally written on a sheet of papyrus or vellum. What is papyrus or vellum? We've talked about this before. Paul.
Papyrus was originally made in Egypt, but it's kind of like reeds,
Mm-hmm.
dried up and bound together. I don't know about vellum.
Yeah, they're sliced, they're pressed to get all the moisture out, and when they're done with it, it's like gauze. And the natural cellulose that's left is almost sticky, and they can lay that gauze, in different directions, and they form a couple layers, and then they usually keep it compressed with a lot more rocks, just to keep it, But anyway, it ends up being this thicker gauze type material that they wrote on, and the papyrus, interestingly, a lot of it still exists today from ancient times, where our paper would not last that long that we use today. Vellum is actually animal skin. Okay, it could be from just about any animal, but for the most part, it's animal skin. Again, it was rolled up, tied with a string, and sealed with a clay or gum seal impression. Wax seals didn't come into play till much later to guarantee the letter's authenticity. In this case, Sanballat sent an unsealed or open letter because he wanted the contents of this letter, again, the charges against Nehemiah, to be made known and circulated by the public at large. To send an unsealed letter would have been unprofessional and uncouth, especially to someone like Nehemiah, who was used to the royal formality of the Persian court. You'd never do something so primitive as to send an unsealed letter. So maybe Nehemiah didn't send him an unsealed letter back. I don't know. Sanballat's accusations of treason and threat of revolt was very serious. If word had made its way back to the king, it could mean military incursion and the execution of everyone involved. More specifically, in verse 7, Nehemiah is accused of appointing or ordaining prophets to officially proclaim Nehemiah as their new king and thus usurp the throne of King Artaxerxes. Now, one thing, Nehemiah could appoint government officials, right? But he could not appoint or ordain prophets. He was not a religious leader. Yes.
Later on, he did bring the Levites back into play as prophets, and they were the leaders of, their family of Levi, but they were in charge of the tabernacle and all the religious holdings.
Right.
So, he did bring all the Levites back.
There's a possibility that he could have been of that tribe as well. Okay. But again, he's acting, though, by the king as the governor. Okay. So it is a governmental or civic position. It's not a position of religion. And they had priests, and they had Ezra, and they had people that would take care of that. So it was not really something that he could legally do, is appoint prophets. Okay. Notice how Sanballat is portraying himself to the people and to the king as the superior authority, because he's willing to meet with Nehemiah to impartially examine the matter. He will act as the voice of reason and peace. What a BSer, right? I mean, this guy, he's special. He's a special guy. Yeah. And, that's really in some ways how the Roman Catholic Church became so powerful. Because the three biggest churches way back in the day was the Alexandrian Church, the Antiochian Church, and the Roman Church. And the Antiochian Church and the Alexandrian Church were relatively close to one another, all things considered. But the Roman Church was far away. And so what would happen is that these two churches would argue with one another. They would argue about dates and how events took place and how things unfolded, and they would sit there and argue back and forth. And then to make the decision of what was true or not, they would appeal to the Roman church. They were far away. And so by appealing to them, they kind of unwittingly placed the Roman church in a position of superiority. Then by the time the Muslims came in, decimated the Alexandrian church, decimated the Antiochian church, but the Roman church way up there was nice and safe. They didn't have any problems. And they got bigger and richer while the others got weaker and poorer, and hence they became the dominating force. And so he's putting himself in that position by saying, oh, I'll work with you and I'll work with you and I'll get you guys together and we'll work it out. We'll make peace and,
He was the overconfident one. He underestimated Nehemiah.
Yeah, he's lying through his teeth. But he's hoping that, he's trying to gain sympathy to the people and gain sympathy with the king. And then the king if the king does come, then the king will take his side. And he's just playing people, right? Yeah. Yeah, he's a scoundrel. We're just about out of time. Nehemiah's response was short and sweet because he wasn't going to give their foolishness any credibility. He called the report a lie and continued to refuse their offer. Nehemiah may have sent his own messenger to King Artaxerxes to assure him of his loyalty. So he may have done that, and I think that would have been a prudent thing to do. In verse 9, Nehemiah's prayer utilized a figure of speech. His enemy was to have weak hands, and that refers to him praying that his enemy would become discouraged, that they would eventually give up and get discouraged and, give up their foolishness. Whereas strong hands refers to his continued encouragement, that they would be discouraged and he would become more encouraged. This Hebrew figure of speech is uncommon, but was used in the Ostracon from Lachish, circa 588 BC. Are you familiar with the Ostracon of Lachish? Well, you must familiarize yourself with that, yeah. I don't know what it is either, okay. As Christians, we are always in a state of spiritual warfare, so this is a good prayer for us when we are in an extraordinary conflict. Praying for the bad guy, for his hands to get weak, and praying to God that he would strengthen our hands. Amen? I think we got to stop. Good stuff from Nehemiah. Nehemiah was a bullfrog. I was singing that today while I was working on this.